Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my pleasure to welcome you to number 94 in our nonprofit empowerment series. And today the subject is capital campaign, what's changed and what hasn't. Change is the only constant. Now I can tell you what hasn't changed. Two things come to mind. Number one, capital campaigns remain the most efficient and cost-effective way to raise money. And the number one expert on the planet is Andrea Kihlstedt out of New York City on capital campaigns. And she's been doing it all over the last 30 to 40 years. She started, I think, when she was 17 or something. And Andrea, first of all, how is the weather in New York?
You know, it's cloudy, but I can tell that spring is going to be here soon.
It will. But Andrea has done it all in capital campaigns. She's written the books on capital campaigns. She's presented. She's been a coach, a consultant. She's designed courses. And she's given, we calculate, about 1,000 presentations. Yours truly has sat in 4 of them, and I have to admit, it was listening to Andrea give a presentation at an AFP conference, I think it was around 1998. I was listening into the audience, and I was enthralled about this lady who could make instruction about fundraising so engaging, so fun, and I wondered, could I ever do that? And she has been a wonderful mentor. And I was about to introduce her as the First Lady of Capital Campaigns. But the truth is, there's no man that's her equal either. Andrea, I'm going to take a pulse of the audience. But before we do that, you spin off more than a corporate mogul, all those different ventures. Your newest venture that you co-founded is the Capital Campaign Toolkit. So before we dig in, can you take a minute and tell people about the Capital Campaign Toolkit?
Well, I thank you so much for having me, Jim. First of all, I really appreciate it. And hello to all of you on the session today. How nice to be here with you. I'm in New York City, just so you know, and the oceanscape behind me is the most recent piece of art by my assorted grandchildren, in case you wondered. People often do.
Some live on Cape Cod, don't they?
Some live on Cape Cod, and it's those Cape Cod grandchildren and their parents who were here and did a wonderful oceanscape for me on my glass wall. So that's why you see fishies behind me. I have the good fortune 5 years ago of founding an organization that we called Capital Campaign Toolkit with my partner in crime, Amy Eisenstein, who many of you may know. Amy is well known in the fundraising field. And Amy and I have had a fantastic time building a new model, a new way to provide campaign services, campaign counsel and advising services to people in campaigns. Now, I'm particularly thrilled to be here with all of you at this very hour, literally at this very hour, because just now, Capital Campaign Toolkit has rebranded and had its brand new name and website have launched. It is now called Capital Campaign Pro. And if you go to capitalcampaignpro.com, I'm pretty sure that that new website is live, and you are among the first people who will see it if you go check it out. So it has been months in the making, and just so happens that it has gone live at the same time I'm speaking with you. So check it out. You can be among the first to see our new look and our new logo and our new name. We outgrew the name Toolkit, and now we are Capital Campaign Pro because we help all of our clients become Capital Campaign Pros. So Jim, thank you for the opportunity to say that. It makes me very excited.
Well, I think too, you wanted to wait to launch your new website until you were a guest on our webinar.
Is that what it was?
Is that right? Hey, listen, Andrea, I'd like to take the capital campaign pulse of the audience.
Yes.
Who can participate in two different ways. Number one, you can type into the chat box, which I'm going to ask you to do right now. I have a series of about 6 questions. Or this, we have an audience, Andrea, made up of executive directors, CEOs, board chairs, board members, volunteers, the entire nonprofit family. Or this is for you. At any time, I have several questions for Andrea, but if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A and we will respond to that right away. This hour is for your benefit. But I want to take the pulse, the capital campaign pulse. And so the first couple of questions, if you can type into the chat space, yes or no, how many of you are engaged in a capital campaign right now? Who's engaged in a capital campaign right now? Right, yes or no?
Excellent.
Okay. Now, how many of you recently completed a capital campaign? These are easy yes or no questions. How many have recently completed a capital campaign?
Nope.
Okay. Now, how many, and Andrea would love to hear this, how many of you all are in the planning stage of a capital campaign? Write in yes or no. This question is a little tougher. For those of you who are either in a capital campaign or completed a capital campaign recently, how large was your campaign goal? How many million? I'm assuming it wasn't billion. So if it's billion, tell us, and we let you take over the camera. How large was your capital campaign? I see Christine Howland from Trinity was at 500 million. Congratulations. And finally, before I start picking on Andrea, how many of you have engaged, this is yes or no, how many of you have engaged Capital Campaign Council? Yes or no? Smart people, Andrea.
Good.
Okay.
I hope people engage expertise. It's the, you know, it's the one time really, because campaigns only come around every once in a while. There are very few people in nonprofit organizations that have really done them from soup to nuts. So it's the one time it really is important to hire someone who's been around that process again and again.
I have a final question, and that is, it's a little more complicated than yes or no, but put it to a few words. What do you want to learn most about Capital Campaign over the next hour? I'll make sure that Andrea and I address it. And by the way, we have a deal. If the question is a real softball, easy, Jim takes it. If it's really difficult and challenging, Andrea takes it. So what do you want to learn most? What do you want to learn most about capital campaigns over the next hour? Type it in. It's a little tougher than yes or no.
Figure that out. You know, Jim, you make me relieved with that question. I thought you were going to ask, well, what in general do people want to learn? I thought we'd get questions about all kinds of stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's start, and you can pick up, maybe you need a little time. So again, please use that Q&A box. If you have a question that kind of reacts to the discussion and conversation that Andrea and I have, jump in. Again, something that hasn't changed, capital campaigns remain the most efficient and most cost-effective way to raise either modest amounts of money or astronomical amounts of money. And also a constant is our guest today, Andrea Kihlstedt of Capital Campaign Pro. Do I have that correctly? Yes. She has been the go-to expert for longer than she wants to admit. It's somewhere between 30 and 40 years. Andrea, what do you say we get going?
Great. And Christine, thank you for your question. I see it there. For the rest of you, when you have questions, and Christine, I do see yours, when you have questions, if you can open your Q&A box and put it in the Q&A, it'll be easier for me to keep an eye on it, right? Instead of having the scrolling chat. So And as questions come up, I rather like to answer people's questions through a session like
Thank you,
this.
Andrea. And by the way, John also is watching for comments
Okay.
and questions.
Great.
So let's go. I like starting
Let's
with
go.
I like starting with the basics, okay?
Yes,
And
sir.
it doesn't get more basic than this. What is a capital campaign?
You know, my favorite definition of a capital campaign is a dollar goal up against a time deadline.
Wow. Repeat that again.
A dollar goal up against a time deadline.
Wow.
That's a pretty
Wow.
broad definition of a capital campaign. My old friend Bob Pierpont used to say that. And that has, I actually add to it that it has to be, you have to be raising money for something that is going to change the level or the trajectory, or is going to ramp up the organization, right? There's springboard. It's a springboard campaign that takes the organization from one level to another, but they always have a dollar goal, and they should always have a deadline, a time period.
And usually too, they solve a timely problem or challenge. Is that right?
Well, yeah, they solve some problem, that something that the organization is dealing with. They have objectives that take the organization to the next level forward. They solve the problem, I suppose, of what's holding the organization back, what's keeping it from being able to serve more people or to carry out their mission to its fullest. Now, that's a pretty broad
Andrea,
definition.
what's it? Yeah, it is. We're staying broad. Okay. We have a big tent here, don't we?
Yeah.
What's the difference between a capital campaign and a capacity campaign?
Yeah, Jim, I'm so glad you asked that, because there are many things about capital campaign fundraising that if I could change the language we use about it in the common parlance, I would. And this is one of those situations. I believe actually that when we use the word capital campaign in its most general sense, what we really mean is a capacity campaign. We are raising money for something that will increase the capacity of the organization. One subset of that is a building campaign for organizations that need
brick and mortar, right?
Bricks and mortar, right? That's a subset of that. But there are all kinds of ways that organizations raise money to increase their capacity. So we use the language in a way that's not accurate. We should really call all of these things capacity campaigns. And then capital campaigns should just be building campaigns. That's, we should refer to it that way. Another way you might think about it is, this always makes me laugh, capital campaign is a campaign that asks people to dip into their capital.
Hey, can I borrow that?
You may. So that's another way to sort of say, all right, this language is funny. It's like the word feasibility study is also a misnomer, right? Feasibility studies don't really test the feasibility of a project. Most projects are going to go ahead anyway. They really are campaign planning studies. Only everyone refers to them as feasibility studies. So
and we're going to
in this business is odd.
We're going to dig into feasibility study in about 10 minutes. Andrea, we hear about combined campaigns and comprehensive campaigns. What are they and why do they matter? Combined campaigns and comprehensive campaigns.
Yes. Well, here's another language twist in this business, and people get very confused about it. So a combined campaign, these are the sort of standard ways we think about it. A combined campaign typically combines campaign objectives that include a building or things of that sort, building or equipment or, special projects that you take on through the campaign, and combines it with endowment. Right. And putting those two things together is usually what we mean when we think about a combined campaign. Now, we usually recommend that people who are doing building campaigns include some endowment component so that they can count planned gifts. Yes.
I love endowments.
Yes. Well, I love endowments, and they're very difficult to raise straight endowment money through a campaign. So let me get that off the table, right? endowment campaigns done capital campaign style are generally among the most difficult, and we don't recommend them. But let me go back to this question of comprehensive campaigns. You asked about combined campaigns and comprehensive campaigns. So a comprehensive campaign is the kind of campaign that many universities do. And that's a campaign where they count pretty much everything that comes in the door from one date to another. These are usually complex institutions, and they may have multiple smaller campaigns going on. And the comprehensive nature of the campaign will count all of the sub-campaigns plus annual fundraising for a period of years of the campaign, plus any endowment component of the campaign, plus anything else the institution happens to be raising money for. Now, there is a healthy debate about whether these are wise or not wise, whether this model of particularly including annual funding, is wise for organizations that are not colleges and universities. My preference is that it is not, that we shouldn't do these comprehensive campaigns. We shouldn't include annual fund in the campaign goal. But there are many consultants who would argue, I have had many vociferous arguments about that.
Well, let me ask you, Andrea, why do you feel they should not be included?
I'll tell you why. Because for the most part, when we have a capital campaign, we are going back to the same donors who give us annual fundraising.
Right.
And which is why some people would argue that they should be together. However, people tend to give annual fundraising or recurring gifts, right, as I would call them. They tend to give recurring gifts in one way, out of one pocket, let's say. They tend to give recurring gifts often out of its checkbook giving, right? Or it may be other giving that's relatively easy for them to do. Whereas they think about giving larger capital gifts every once in a while out of different sources of funds. So you can go to someone for, let's say, $1,000 a year after year after year for annual fundraising, and you can go to the same donor for a special gift over and above, once and done, and the same donor will consider a far bigger gift to a capital campaign, and they will do it at the very same time that they are giving annually at a relatively low level. My sense is that to present it that way is far clearer and easier for both the donor and the institution to keep track of.
Okay, Andrea, we're not going to say, I forget, it's somewhere between 30 to 40 years. You've been doing this capital campaign consulting and instruction and presentations for a long time. What significant trends have you observed over your 30 to 40 year career in capital campaigns?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that I've been doing this business for so long. I don't know quite how that happened. When I was a kid, would I ever have imagined that that's what I would have done with my career? No, but I seem to have done it. And I have seen some trends, though. Let me start out by saying some things that have not changed. Right. What has not changed is that capital campaigns still remain incredibly powerful ways to raise money. They really are. They're just astonishing for small organizations and large organizations, all for, little organizations that do a $500,000 campaign, raising maybe $50,000 a year, and all of a sudden they can raise $500,000 through a campaign. That's remarkable, right?
Yeah.
Or an organization with a multi-million-dollar annual fundraising, capacity, they all of a sudden can raise 10 or 20 times what they raise through a special capital campaign over and above that. That continues on, and it continues on even more so than when I was young in this business, right? As people have gotten wealthier, we have, as the population has, some at the top has gotten wealthier, there's been a bigger gap. We have seen more and more people give large gifts at the top of capital campaigns, and it makes it even more powerful. So I continue to be bowled over by the effectiveness of these organizations. And we at Capital Campaign Pro, I have to get used to saying that, At Capital Campaign Pro, we work with organizations, we work with $1 million campaigns, and we work with $100 million campaigns.
Yeah.
And we see it at every level of the trajectory, how incredibly effective they are and how cost effective they are. You can wrap your arms around this kind of fundraising, right? It's never thousands and thousands of donors. You're always worried about 20, 30, 40, 50 donors.
Wow.
You wrap your arms around that. And that's what I love about this business. So that has not changed. What has changed is that, as I said, gifts, the amount of money that comes in through very large gifts has increased.
Yeah.
So now we can expect through the leadership gift phase of a campaign to raise, 60, 70, 80% of the money.
Wow.
Right. And with some organizations that have a narrow base, I mean, I've been working with a project in Providence for some time. They will have raised 95% of their money before going public.
Wow.
95%. Because the amount that they can raise from the base and small gifts drops off precipitously.
Right.
And that's not uncommon.
I mean, 25 years ago, it was closer to like a 60-40 split, wasn't it?
Yeah. And we're, again, of course, it depends on the organization. If you're talking a university with a huge, big donor base, right, that's one kind of a campaign. By and large, I'm thinking of organizations that are community-based organizations. Yeah. Maybe an organization doing a $10 million campaign, for example, that has $1 million budget or a $500,000 budget. Right. For these organizations, it turns out to be hard to raise a ton of money at the bottom end of the campaign, but relatively easier to raise that money at the top end.
Wow.
Right. And of course, what that does is that organizations that are smart use the campaign process to really solidify their relationships with major donors.
Yeah.
Right. That sets them in good stead for many years to come often. So it's powerful fundraising. That hasn't changed. Now, what else has changed? Of course, recently, over a number of years, and particularly with COVID now, people are using the internet. Look at us. We are talking from very different places, very comfortably using Zoom. Zoom has transformed the way we can interact with our donors, right? We can do things virtually today that we wouldn't have dreamt of doing 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
I mean, we were taught it had to be face-to-face.
That's right.
You were to ask for a major gift.
And it still is face-to-face. It's just not face-to-face in the room all the time.
Yeah, it's screen to screen.
It's screen to screen. And it's face-to-face. I can see you, Jim. I can't hug you, but I can see you. So the use of Zoom and people's comfort level with virtual meetings, whether you use Teams or Zoom, I'll use Zoom for the phrase, but it's like Kleenex, right? The use of virtual technology for meetings, I think, has been transformative for campaigns because it's much easier. And I see there's a question about volunteers that somebody has asked. This begins to address it. But it's much easier for volunteers to serve on committees if they can be on committee meetings via Zoom.
Right.
Right. And you can, if you know how to facilitate a Zoom meeting well, you can make those work really well, and people will show up and will participate.
And it really enlarges the geographic scope, right?
It does. It does. So many communities have people in the South going north during one season, or people in the North going south during another season. Now, honestly, while it's still nice to go and see your donor where the weather is lovely, the push to do that is a little less intense than it used to be, because you can stay in touch with them in a way that feels quite personal still. So I think that's a fantastic change.
Yeah. Andrea, how about if we dissect some of the major ingredients of a capital campaign, and you talk a little, again, what's changed, what hasn't? And you mentioned it before, feasibility studies. And I remember listening to you 10, 15 years ago, you were a little counterintuitive. You challenged the status quo. I love that in feasibility studies. Can you talk a little about it?
Well, I can't remember when I was challenging that. I seem to like to challenge status quo. It seems to be built into my DNA, sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. I have recently really challenged the way people do feasibility studies through the Capital Campaign Toolkit and now Pro. We are doing it radically differently. Let me begin by saying that I think feasibility studies are incredibly important. And Marv, I'm happy to answer your question now. Question is, how valuable are they, especially for smaller nonprofits with limited funds to invest in the process? Here's a way to think about it. Feasibility studies, when done in what I think of as the right way, it's not what everybody thinks is the right way, mind you, I'll explain that in a minute. When done in the right way, are really your best way or one of your best ways to engage your top donors before you go to them to ask them for very large gifts. And what we know in this major gifts fundraising business, and that's what a capital campaign is, is that the key element of major gifts fundraising is not asking for the gift, it's engaging the donor. Once you've really engaged the donor in whatever it is you're going to be asking for, the chances of their giving are far greater, and the chances of giving more generously are far greater. So if you think about a feasibility study, not so much as to tell you whether the project is feasible, but as an opportunity to really authentically engage the people who might give those top gifts in a discussion about what it is you're planning to do, and actually listen to what they say and give them a chance to tell you if this is something they will consider supporting when the time is right. You are already through that process going down the road of making them feel like, and in fact, making them part of your organization's planning process. And that's incredibly powerful.
I remember you challenging the status quo because you said, why would you want to delegate those intimate conversations to people outside the organization as opposed to board and staff leadership?
Well, and that is exactly how we have now really transformed the way we do feasibility studies. With what we call a guided feasibility study model, what we do is that we work with the staff and key board members in organizations to get them, to prepare them and do everything necessary for a feasibility study. And we train them and they go out and talk to the donors. And then they capture the information, we help them collate it, we help develop the recommendations, and we co-present the recommendations to the board. In doing the feasibility study that way, you really build the relationships with your donors, and you take out of the picture this sort of, what do you call it, the screen. I always think of the Wizard of Oz being behind the screen.
And
right?
Total pulls
the screen. This pulls the screen out. So everybody knows what the donors said. Everybody knows what happened in those conversations. Everybody knows how the decisions were made about what the recommended goal will be and about the recommendations for the project going forward. What we have found, and over the last 5 years, we've now done about 35 of these in this new model, and they have proven to be very effective, far more effective than I ever thought they would be, actually.
Wow.
That's really been a fantastic thing to new model.
Wow.
I'm so excited by it.
Wow. Hey, let's talk about staff versus volunteer roles.
Yes. So, somebody's asked the question about that, which is, let me see, Christine, I think you asked the question about whether people are still using volunteers in campaigns. In some larger institutions, colleges and universities, I think, have largely moved to a staff-driven campaign model because managing volunteers proves to be difficult. I still think that there are roles for volunteers in campaigns. And I think it's important to involve them. In fact, in Capital Campaign Pro, we encourage a variety of work groups or ad hoc committees where you can involve people in various aspects of the campaign. And some of those people then help open doors. Some of them then help solicit gifts. but you provide opportunities for people to be involved in ways that is comfortable for them, ways that
Right.
are comfortable for them. So I think we're looking for ways to involve people. Real fundraising is not about the money. I mean, it always seems like it's about the money. It's about building those relationships and engaging and involving people. And if you do that, the money will follow. And if you forget about that, you're going to be disappointed when you go just to ask people for money.
Hey, that's a aha moment. Can you repeat that statement? I loved it.
I don't think I can, but I can.
Yeah,
I
yes,
can
you
shorten
can.
it.
Okay.
What I'll tell you is that you have to be thinking on one hand about engaging the people from whom you want to go to get the largest gifts. And if you engage them and they become part of the process, the chances of their giving and giving more is significantly increased. So you can't just think about money. You have to think about money and engagement, and volunteer opportunities are one way to do that. So while volunteers can be difficult, I get that, and time consuming and frustrating and all of that, you have to be very careful in the choice you make. I'll give you a very quick way to involve volunteers that safeguards you from difficult ones. And that is to invite people to short-term volunteer assignments. Invite people to a volunteer assignment for 2 or 3 meetings, then thank them very much for their service, let them go, right? The ones that were lousy, don't invite them back. The ones that were great, invite them to the next committee, right?
That sounds like a contract.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Hey, here's a subject that's very near and dear to your heart. Campaign collateral material.
Yes. You need less of it than you think.
Good.
Yes. I can't tell you how many boxes of old campaign brochures are moldering in people's attics. We at the toolkit, at the Campaign Pro, use something called the donor discussion guide and a simple Word document that's a background statement for people. But we, for many of our campaigns, we don't even suggest they do a campaign brochure. Wow. Many people now use slide decks. Many people use videos, include videos. Videos are so easy to do now. Yeah. Right. The world is changing with regard to campaign materials, and for the better, I think.
Yeah. How about campaign counsel? What changes have you observed in your career?
Yeah, so it used to, when I was a young woman, first in this business, this is actually a true story. I was taken under the wing of a very, very smart campaign consultant. And he taught me what he knew. And at one point, he invited me to a meeting of other consultants. Meeting was in Washington, D.C. I remember going to this meeting, and then we were all sitting around a table, and it was, I don't know, 8 or 9 men, all dressed in suits, and they were all quite stuffy, and some of them were a little portly, and they all were very full of everything they knew. And then there was me, and I didn't think I knew very much of anything. So I sat there being fairly intimidated. And when I got home to my husband the next day or whenever it was, I said to him, I don't think this is the field for me. I don't think I'm the right person for this, because I'm not like those guys, right? And I think that actually was the way campaign consultants were at the time. They tended to be men, and they tended to dress and, to be more formal, and they tended to be sort of a little pompous, if you will. That's the way I thought of them. And gradually things have eased up. We have more and more women in the field. There has become a more informal way of dealing. All of the professions recently, because of technology, all of the professions have changed, including capital campaign consulting. And we are leading the pack with that through Capital Campaign Pro, that we provide online services, we provide peer learning groups, and we provide expert advising done through virtual meetings. So we are doing what what the legal profession and the accounting profession and the medical profession are all doing. So we have led the way in a change, and I think other people are going to follow us. It's just a matter of time.
And I think 70% of the AFP, Association of Fundraising Professional Membership, is now female.
Yeah. Yep.
And
And, you
so,
know, I gotta say, hope I don't anger anybody, but the last big AFP meeting I went to, I was so upset that all of the people sitting on stage in leadership positions were men, and then to look at the audience, and I never went back.
hmm, hmm.
It just angered me.
Well, we'll stop there. But I hear you. Let's talk about sources of gifts. How have they changed?
Sources of gifts. So I'm not sure how sources of gifts have changed, actually. You know, gifts for capital campaigns tend to be from individuals in one way or another, sometimes through family foundations, some in, you know, they're given in a variety of ways. People give gifts differently now, right? Donor advised funds and a variety of ways of giving gifts. But by and large, it's individuals making decisions about gifts that rules the roost when it comes to capital campaigns. Mm-hmm. Some foundations will also give to capital campaigns, though many still say they won't. They'll give to the projects for which the capital campaigns are designated, not to the campaign itself. They're not interested in being campaign donors by and large. I don't know. What have I missed?
Let's dig in a little more on the type of donors. Are we seeing gender balance? Are we seeing generational balance? What changes have we seen?
You know, there are people who are doing a lot of research on this. There certainly are younger donors who are giving and giving generously. They tend to give differently. For capital campaigns, I think we still are relying on people, you know, in their 40s, 50s and up for those gifts. The women are giving more. Women have more wealth and are giving more. They tend to think about giving in a slightly different way. But I haven't seen a huge shift. I think, you know, if you talk to someone like Ann Lair, there are some other people who have done real research on women and giving and how they give. I'm not really up to date on that.
Yeah. Well, we all name the name Mackenzie Scott, right?
Well, Mackenzie Scott is an outlier. I mean, that she is an outlier. So I don't think
$14 million. And what I love, it's all unrestricted. But let's bring it back to home. You talked about meetings. Talk about the impact of virtual technology.
Yeah, you know, I think it is not to be underestimated, the virtual technology, the quickness with which we can be in touch with people, the ease of communication with people, the speed with which we can communicate, the peculiar, what do you call it? Sort of, friendliness of email, right? And think about it this way. You know, we used to write letters, right?
What's a letter? Hey, what's a letter?
What's a letter, right? I mean, now when you get a letter, a real letter in your mailbox, you actually open it because it's so rare. But the big difference, this was an aha for me when I thought about it, the big difference between a letter and an email is that an email is so easy to respond to.
Yeah.
Right. And a letter is not easy to respond to. So we have this ease of communication, this ease of being in touch with people. And when we're in touch with people by email, we have access to people that we might not have access to otherwise by other forms of communication. Yeah. So I think that really has transformed the way we communicate with donors. It's transformed the way we build relationships with large donors. Right? Because you can have the wealthiest guy in town, just as an example. Let's say there's the wealthiest guy in town. It used to be that you would write formal letters. I remember doing that to the wealthiest guy in town. And then you would call his secretary, right? That's the way it used to be. He would have a secretary, and that's what you'd call her. You'd call his secretary, and she, if you're lucky, would schedule a meeting, and you would get all dressed up, and you would go and sit formally and have a conversation, right? Well, think about it. That's not the way a lot of these relationships happen anymore. These relationships happen with someone introducing you via email. And you can have these short, little, immediate interchanges with people.
Yeah.
that build over time. It's fascinating, really. That's made a big difference in all, or should make a big difference in all major gifts fundraising.
Yeah.
And particularly in capital campaigns.
Hey, let's take a little detour for a moment.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
We all, even Andrea Kihlstedt, wish we had the opportunity to have another chance and do an ask over. Do you have a story you'd like to share about an ask you wish you could do over?
Well, I'm not sure this is an ask that I would do over. It's just a funny story, and it taught me a great lesson. It was a number of years ago, and I was asking a friend for a gift for a concert series that I was running.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I ran a concert series, and because I knew how to raise money, I didn't sell tickets to the concert series. I actually raised money to support the concert series. That seemed easier. And I had a very wealthy friend. We were actually close friends. We had become friends since before this woman became wealthy. She had married a guy who was very wealthy, and he had died the year before, leaving her a lot of money, a lot of wealth. And the same year, my mother had died. Right now, my mother did not leave me a lot of wealth, but this woman knew my mother because we were good friends. I knew her husband who died, right? So we went and had lunch, and I was asking her for a gift. And I was asking her, I think, for $10,000 for this concert series of mine. Mm-hmm. And she said at the end of our lunch, she said, well, Andrea, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you 5 in honor of Otto, her husband, and 5 in honor of your mother. I thought that was so cool, right? Yeah. And I said, thank you so much. That's just great. And I went home. Then I realized that I didn't know if she meant 500. Earlier year, she had given me $1,000. So I didn't know if she meant $500 each or $5,000 each. Right? Okay. It just was like, I didn't clarify. How did you follow up? How did you follow up? I was embarrassed, right? She knew I was in the fundraising business, and I was embarrassed to go back to her. But of course I had to. So I went back to her. I said, I'm really embarrassed to say this to you, but I don't know what you meant by 5 in honor of your husband, 5 in honor of my mother. Did you mean 500 or 5,000? And she said without hesitation, without pausing, she said, how do you know I didn't mean 500,000? I have 2 proposals on my desk for that right now. Wow. Oh my goodness. There's a lot of learning in that, right? Yeah. Yeah. I undershot the mark. I didn't clarify what it was she was trying to tell me, right? It sounds like you're a human, but something in my career, when a donor handed me an envelope, I always ask for permission to open it. And it's sometimes just like that, you can be very, very surprised. Right. Hey, you've been at this for a while. We're saying somewhere between 30 to 40 years. What are some of the trends? He's trying to tell you how old I am. Yeah, you started this at 17. What are some of the trends that have inspired you that you see happening in capital campaigns? Here, I'll tell you what inspires me. And it inspired me early in my career, but it really inspires me now. In Capital Campaign Pro, we have, I think at this moment, about 65 clients all over the country. We have 12 or 13 advisors working with us and 65 clients. And in all of those clients, we work with the most remarkable people who are doing the most remarkable things. I mean, these organizations are just astonishing. And every day I think to myself, how fortunate I am to have a bird's eye view of the remarkable things people are doing in this world. That, we hear the news, we listen to the news, we listen to all these horrible things that are happening. We listen to all of the conflicts around the world and the challenges in our own country. And I sit there looking at these unbelievable people. I mean, young people and old people. I mean, I've worked with an 80-year-old who raised $1 million for a school for unwanted children in a corner of India. a little corner of India I didn't know even existed. And she raised that money. I mean, when she first called me, it's like, here's this woman up in her 80s. She's telling me she wants to raise $1 million. I had to say to myself, don't question that. She wants to do it. Help her. She did it, right? I was on the phone yesterday with people who run a day program for students with various disabilities who age out of the system at age 22, right? Providing them with services in the community, with the community. These people are amazing what they do. Every day I see people who for the love of a project are willing to go into this business that is for everybody uncomfortable. It is always uncomfortable to say, we're going to take this organization to the next level of support. We're going to ask people for bigger gifts than we've ever asked them for. I'm going to get the courage to ask somebody for more than I could ever imagine giving myself. Yeah. Right. And that I never get over being thrilled by that. Never.
Whether you're a volunteer or a paid professional,
or a paid staff
this
member.
is noble work. This is noble endeavors.
It is utterly remarkable work. It really is.
Yeah.
And I know there are many things that are frustrating about it. Many people in nonprofits are not paid as well as they should be paid, aren't treated as well as they might be treated. But the work that people do and the effort and energy they put into it is just unending. I'm also inspired by the generosity of people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
$485 billion.
Unbelievable. And in the capital campaign business, I get to see it writ large. I get to see people you would never imagine coming in with $1 million gifts.
Yeah.
Right? People who a little farmer who wrote a personal check for $1 million and sent it with a regular postage stamp. Right? The poor woman who opened the mail thought she was going to fall over when she saw that check. Right? I mean, nobody you would ever know in that community. He just happened to have sold a piece of land and liked that organization. Right? A farmer. Right? I mean, a little farmer, not a big corporate farmer. Right?
Hey, Andrea, I'm sorry, but we have to flip the coin.
Yes.
What are some of your biggest concerns?
About capital campaigns?
About some of the trends you've been seeing. Yeah.
I'm concerned about the next generation. I'm concerned about the next generation sort of not stepping up into the world of philanthropy in the same way.
Are you concerned? It used to be an 80-20 split, but I think now it's well over 90% of gift income comes from just 10% of the donors, and the percentage of households who contribute some type of gift used to be, I think, at around the year 2000, 2/3, and now it's down to 50%.
Right. That is definitely concerning. It's not a particular concern that I deal with because that's not the kind of fundraising, that I'm in. I see from the capital campaign point, I see this remarkable generosity at the top. Right.
Yeah.
And it certainly is worrisome that people are dropping off, that people are not giving as generous, not that households are not giving, that there is a shift in the way households are giving. There is a book, I happen to have it over here, called The Generosity Crisis, the case for connection. Do you know that book?
Right.
So, I mean, it certainly is a concern. It's not a concern that touches me or that I'm particularly worried about. But when I look at the next generation of people, the people who are, investing in crypto and the sort of people who are thinking differently. While there are many, I think everyone is becoming very entrepreneurial, and I think that's wonderful in many ways. But I think it shifts the way people function when it comes to philanthropy, and I don't know how that's going to play out over time. Yeah. So I won't be around to see it, but I'm I do wonder about it.
I think you're wrong. I think you're going to be around leading for a long time.
Yeah, right.
Hey, listen, and talk about that. Let's get to brass tacks. Say we have some people on the call that are contemplating their first capital campaign. What three pieces of advice would you emphasize for a first capital campaign?
Yes, do it. That's the first one. Do it. Do it. Do this kind of fundraising. I would encourage everyone to do capital campaign fundraising. Even if you just do a small campaign, the capital campaign model works. And even if you're not going to do a big building campaign, you can adapt this model for smaller projects within your organization. So get knowledgeable about capital campaign fundraising, even if you don't have a big building coming up. So that's number one. Number two, understand that your ability to raise money for a capital campaign depends entirely on your ability to get to know the people who have significant capacity in your community. They are people just like everybody else. As my mother used to say, they put on their pants one leg at a time. And all you have to do is to be curious about them and get to know them and ask them for advice, and the world will be yours, right? You don't have to be fancy. You don't have to be who they are. Actually, I have an interesting tale. I like small arts organizations, and a number of them here in the city I am an informal advisor to. And the executive director of one of these little sort of extreme contemporary arts organization, I had a glass of wine with her recently, and she's very good and very capable. And she said to me, Andrea, do I have to be friends with these donors? And I thought that was a really good question, right? It was she said, I don't belong in the same society they're in. I don't live the same way. My husband is a musician. I didn't grow up in wealthy. I live in a little apartment. I don't have the trappings of wealth that they have. Do I have to pretend? Do I have to dress? So my advice to someone young in the business is you don't have to be their friend. You have to have a relationship with them, but you don't have to pretend to be other than who you are. You can have a kind of friendship with them that is totally authentic and that doesn't pretend to be anything.
And it's built on a shared vision of doing good.
That's right.
Hey, you're about the smartest person I know. If you could travel back in time, and even you can't, but if you could travel back in time, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Figure out what it is I really like to do and I'm really good at, and do it.
Would the word capital campaign be in there?
A capital campaign happens to suit what I'm good at and like to do.
Yeah.
But it's just that it happens to enable, my career has enabled me to take the things I do well and move them forward. I am a disruptor. I like to think about things carefully. I like to be able to wrap my arms around problems. And this happened to be the field that I wound up in, but it used my skills well. So I would encourage anybody, I would encourage my 21-year-old self to get to know myself earlier, right? It took me a long time to realize what I was really good at. And then but I would hope I had to have the courage to take what I was good at and actually go with that instead of doing what other people told me to do.
Well, first of all, John, we have a few minutes left. John, do we have some questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have one question here that is, what can we do as an industry to reach those different donors, younger donors, women, etc.?
That's a hard one. I'm going to delegate that to Andrea.
Yeah. I think that these days, with diversity, equity, and inclusion so much on the table, we're thinking about that in all kinds of ways. And I think we should be diversifying and reaching out to donors of all different kinds. And I think we need to be very intentional about it. And often the way to do that, just in the simple form, is to pull people together, pull small groups of people together and talk to them, ask them how they want to be engaged, how they want to be involved, how they think about philanthropy. I mean, if, talk to people in the, from the Black community where you are, right? And find out how they give, what their giving patterns are. Pull together a small group of women or a big group of women or several groups of women and ask them, right? The answer to many questions is in posing the question, is in the question itself. So I think I would encourage you to identify some people, to bring them together and to just start having those conversations with them and see what answers emerge.
And Andrea, philanthropy is both the gift of time and money. And as we grow older and hopefully wiser, we actually realize that time is the more precious gift. You can replace money, you can never replace time. And so people that can be philanthropic through being volunteers and donating their time. John, any other questions? We're finishing up here, and I'm going to give Andrea, first of all, thank you for your leadership to the industry. And by the way, there's no slowing down. You inspire us with your knowledge and your courage. And you're not only a lifelong learner, you're a lifelong sharer. So thank you for the way you have shared with Jim Eskin and so many nonprofit professionals and volunteers around the country. By the way, John, can we put up, though it's going to be a little dated, can we put up Andrea's contact information? And she is the co-founder, as of 64 minutes ago, Capital Campaign Pro. Is that right, Andrea?
Yes, that's right. There it says Capital Campaign Toolkit. That will still get to me. Okay. But if you go to capitalcampaignpro.com, you can be among the very first people to see that website. And who knows what kind of glitches are going to pop up in the next 24 hours. But it might be fun for you to go and take a look. Now, that telephone number, for some reason, is not right, however. So don't use that telephone number.
Okay. What's your right? Can you put it in the chat space?
Number that is, but that's not mine.
Okay. That was on. Okay. Nothing. Andrea, thank you for your leadership to donors, to solicitors, to volunteers, to professional. Thank you for sharing again. You have shared wisdom and courage and hope. And so we're not going to let you go. You have met so much of the nonprofit sector. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate your having me on. It's always fun to talk to you about these things. You ask me provocative questions that make me think, which I like to do. And now I am on the East Coast and it is almost 6 o'clock and it is time for me to go and get my evening glass of wine.
Hey, what I say, thank you and enjoy it. Okay. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to our learning community of nonprofit professionals and volunteers. And we'll see you in 2 weeks when we talk about podcasts. So, Andrea, enjoy your wine. And
thank you all.
Community, thank you for
your efforts. Nice to be here with you.
Thank you for your efforts to touch, improve, and save more lives. And we'll say good night.